Allegra, who, of course, is from OCHA, the Department of Humanitarian Affairs.
Thank you. And I too wanted to thank the study team for this great piece of research. And I'll maybe just talk about today's comments. I was actually part of this process in this last round of discussions, which actually started in February 2010, about 2 years ago, when the Integration Steering Group, the body we just referred to, first discussed the issue of integration in humanitarian space. And that was basically the conversation that prompted this need for evidence and this need also for a more in-depth analysis of the issue, which brought us to the study. And now will bring us back to the Integration Steering Group to discuss the findings. But just to say that having listened to all these many conversations we've had on this issue, I think today I just wanted to maybe lift some general points of reflection rather than give you kind of the square humanitarian perspective, which you might have already heard and is already in the publication. And I actually wanted to start, this comes up, referring actually back to something that David said, which is the triple hats, so the DSRs, Gs, RCs, HCs, actually think that integration may work. And so this is actually a quote from their last retreat. Every year, the HCRCs, DSRSG meet in Montreux to discuss, the challenges and how things are going. And actually, this year we also benefited from having HCs, so the ones who are not structurally integrated, like in the case of Somalia. And one of their conclusions was, the realities of integration are as varied as the countries we work in. The challenges are undeniable, but the integrated approach, where implemented effectively, does add value. And I chose this quote because I really think that, at least for me, it kind of sums it all up. And so I just wanted to maybe look at some of the concepts that are in this quote. The realities of integration are as varied as the countries we work in. And I think we've heard that throughout the discussion. It has to be context-based. Every context will pose different challenges. We've also clearly read in the study that the policy of integration affects actors differently. It depends. If you're a UN actor, part of the Secretariat, if you're a UN humanitarian agency, if you're a dual-mandated UN agency, or if you're an NGO. All of you have all of us have a different place kind of in the stakeholder map, and so we will be impacted differently by the policy of integration. And I want to say that the good news, as we've heard, is that the original policy actually did take into account this issue. And in fact, it has all the ingredients for the flexibility that we want to see in the implementation. I mean, and David already referred to form follows function, this principle that when we decide to adopt a model of integration, it just needs to make sense for that context. And I think another point that's been made in many of the conversation is that while we talk a lot about the challenges of integration, we also have to remind ourselves that we're actually talking about very few contexts, number-wise. And in fact, in other forums, we've been talking about the 5%. There's many countries where the principle of integration applies, but the ones where we all face these challenges are 4 or 5. We're talking about Afghanistan, DRC, Somalia, which is a small number if you think of the overall number. So the policy does include all the flexibility measures that we would need. Unfortunately, we're not really making the most of it. And I think this is where I feel, and I think most people agree, that there's more to be done. And we've been talking about how the triple hat, so the DSRSG, RC, HC model, is de facto the default model. So when we go into mission planning, we tend to first look at that model and then look for reasons why that would not work. And I think where we need to go is to a process that really starts with an open question. What does really make sense in this context, taking into account everybody's concerns, and then keep all the options open and try to come to some joint analysis and joint agreement on that. The second point, the challenges are undeniable. And I think this is another thing that the study really helps us to do. Yes, as David pointed out, and as the study points out, there are many factors that impact the ability of humanitarian actors to operate. We're fully aware of that. But I think the study also points out that integration is one of them. And in some contexts, it may pose that additional risk. And I think this was one of the core findings that we appreciated from the study. And but I also think that the fact that we have other problems does not really detract from the fact that we need to tackle the integration problem. And and I think, as David also pointed out, it just reminds us that we have to have more of a comprehensive approach. And so we have to, I shouldn't have said that, but we have to look at all the different issues that affect humanitarian space. I personally co-chair the IASC, Interagency Standing Committee Task Force on Humanitarian Space, and integration is only one of the issues that we have on our agenda. We're talking about counterterrorism measures, we're talking about operating in high-risk environments, acceptance, perception, civ-mil relations, which are somehow related to this discussion. And again, so it's not because we have other problems we should not also be looking at this. I think that's the point, the conclusion we want to see. And I also, on this, I also want to maybe put this in a little bit of a broader perspective. As some of you may know, last year we actually launched a study which was called Stay and Deliver, which was focusing on the issue of security and operating in high-risk environments. And some of the data actually shows that over the last decade, the attacks on humanitarians have tripled. And it's really mostly in those, in the same countries that form our 5%. It's the Afghanistan, it's the Somalia, and it's the Sudan. And I think humanitarians are really struggling with the fact that they're losing their core operating principles of acceptance. I mean, I think we used to base our operation on the concept that they liked us and they would allow us to operate. And I think as a community, we're really struggling with this idea that we're under attack and we don't really know why. And I think as we reflect on that, we're looking at all the possible reasons. And I think this is where we're also looking at the integration issue. And I think, the basic risk analysis tells us, once you've identified your risks, you have to mitigate them. And I think this is part of of where the integration discussion is coming from. So the integration, the realities are varied, the challenges are undeniable, but it can work where implemented effectively. And this is another point I think that's come out in all of these discussions, that really the problem is not the integration policy, but its implementation. And I think, we heard it again yesterday when we had this discussion in Geneva, which is really more of a humanitarian hub, and we heard it from the humanitarians themselves who said, we buy into coherence, we buy into integration generally, but it's about how it's actually being implemented and translated, both at the headquarters and in the field. And I think the study outlines many things we need to do better, but just one point I wanted to make in this discussion today, which is the point about relations with non-UN actors, and in particular the NGOs. I think if we want this to work, we really need to do more to bring the NGOs into the picture. I mean, the policy is clearly built for the UN. It speaks to the UN. It's in theory applies to the UN, but we cannot hope to achieve coherence between the humanitarian and the peace and security objectives if really the large majority of the operational actors are left outside. And it really doesn't work if you just bring in OCHA and the 3 or 4 key UN humanitarian agencies. We really need the NGOs. And so I think as the study, it has some recommendations in this regard, and as David said, there's already some steps that have been taken. A standing invitation has already been extended to an NGO representative at the ISG level. I think we probably need to take it a step further and also make sure that the NGOs are part of every conversation, especially at the field level. And of course, as OCHA, we know how difficult that is. There's many NGOs. There's no one UN NGO voice, and so even bringing the NGOs to the table is a challenge in itself. Okay. Last, does it add value? It does add value when all the other things are happening. Okay, so I think, again, and I heard it also from Alison, we always end up talking about the high transaction cost. Is integration worth all the trouble, And it just makes me reflect on, in OCHA, our tagline is, coordination saves lives. And within OCHA, we're always debating, does it really save lives? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that it helps, And for that, but it helps, the more you invest in it, the more you get out of it. That's, I think, the thing about coordination. And I think the related point is, does it add value to who? I mean, I think the problem with integration, it's very UN or a humanitarian actor or peace and security actor centered. And I think maybe at the center of this debate, we should actually try and put those people that we're all trying to help and, ask them, does this ultimately add value to them? because we might end up with a different answer. And if we do that, I was just thinking of a couple of examples. I was thinking, I'm pretty sure that the people in DRC are actually quite happy that UNHCR, as the head of the protection cluster, speaks to MONUSCO and the mission there and tries to coordinate their activities on the ground. Or the people of Haiti that right after the earthquake could actually benefit from a real joint effort between MINUSTA, who had the logistical might, and the humanitarian actors on the ground. So I think if we start looking at it that way, we might have a better reason to buy into it. So again, I think I just want, my conclusion is basically that we have to think of all of these things. We have to think about the countries we're working in. We have to acknowledge the challenges it poses and manage them. And then again, believe and commit to it, because ultimately I think it can add value. Just as a conclusion, again, I wanted to thank the researchers for the study, and also take a minute to talk about impact and next steps. And I think already the study has really helped move the debate forward, because we're no longer really talking about if integration, but more about the hows of integration, and focusing less about the problems, because now we have a long list of possible solutions that we can debate. And just tell you that some things are already happening. It's not only about panels and discussions. Especially at the New York level, as David said, the Integration Steering Group next week will be meeting to go through all of the recommendations and prioritize the list. We already have the NGOs joining the process. Another point that talks about extending the conversation between NGOs and DPK and DPA is also being taken up, and we've already got several events planned on that. And so I think the next this year and the next, we'll probably see a lot of the operationalization of the recommendations. So I think it's really going to have an impact. Thank you.